Nitin, Rakesh is a distinguished leader in technology and financial services. Um, he is also the CEO of Emphasis, a leading global software service firm. Nitin is passionate about innovation and technology and its impact on everyday lives, and works closely with many Fortune 500 companies in advising them and their transformation roadmap with an applied technology mindset. He was awarded the Gold Stevie for Executive of the Year, Computer Services under the Management Award category. He won the 2019 American Business Awards and International Business Awards Gold Stevie under the Technology Tech Innovator of the Year Services category. He's one of the first 250 CEOs across 26 countries who have committed to build an inclusive work environment, end disability inequality through business performance, and create social and economic value for people living with disabilities across the world. He co-authored Transformation in the Time of Crisis along with Jerry Wind. The book bridges the worlds of industry and academia to bring the knowledge to help businesses thrive in an uncertain world. The book defines 5 fundamental principles that form a highly adaptive framework that gives businesses the tools to adapt and succeed in a new reality. Thanks for joining us today, Nitin. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for the introduction. There's a little bit of an echo on the line. I think it's fine now. So again, delighted to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak and talk about the work that we've done. Of course, you just heard about the book that I co-authored with my author from Wharton Business School, Professor Jerry Wind. The book was actually conceived, interestingly, actually before the crisis started in 2019. We started writing in 2019. The project was conceived even before that, and book itself went through its own transformation. And so let me give a little bit of context on how we ended up with this this topic and the subject matter. So of course, I'm passionate about use of technology in everyday business. You can see that from my background. You can see that from my day-to-day job as CEO at Emphasis. But I think it was also very evident over the last few years, and as we've seen some massive adoption of multiple different technologies, that many businesses that have been around for decades and centuries were starting to get really disrupted. And the common thread that kind of ran through that whole series of disruptions, whether it was retail disruption with Amazon, of course, it started with books and then spread to every part of retail, and now is going into other industries. The kind of transformation we've seen in the media business with Netflix and of course now with Amazon Prime and Apple getting into the same business as well. I think the common thread really was that the consumer expectations from enterprises had changed dramatically, and customer no longer wanted to deal with the business on the terms that the business was setting. For example, if you're a bank and if you're open 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., it's not, I don't want to deal with you only in those 6 hours. I want to be able to actually do business with you anytime. So this concept of anytime money became anytime banking, because the consumer was now empowered with the digital devices that have proliferated the world over the last 10 years. And look at your own personal lives and how much digital tech we're using today, purely based on how much we do on the phone versus doing it all physically. So I think the original concept that we kind of arrived at was looking at multiple businesses, looking at what they were going through from a disruptive standpoint, looking at the consumer empowerment. How can we help enterprises, especially legacy enterprises who were born before the internet age? How can we help them, adopt a toolkit or a framework that could help them, deal with this disruption? So the book was actually focused on, architecture of disruption. And then as COVID hit early in 2020, it started very quickly becoming very evident that a number of those disruptive forces have started to accelerate the change even further. And we've now, it's obviously well understood and well known, but we've now seen, penetration of, for example, e-commerce is doubled in 30 days. What took 10 years happened in 30 days again. So it went from 15-16% of US retail to 32% of US retail within a month of the crisis happening. So, telemedicine was another great example. So all of those disruptive forces kind of got accelerated, and the change got accelerated as well. So the crisis ended up being a major accelerant. And we realized that a number of the principles that we were talking about were actually kind of coming true in fast forward. So we took some more time and effort, and we effectively rewrote large parts of the book and said, how can you use the current crisis to actually create transformation and accelerate that change? So transformation in times of crisis was born out of that crisis, early days in the crisis itself. And the book really is a practical hand guide, that talks about what are some of the principles that can be applied to every business. In fact, not just in business, in not-for-profit, in museums, in your daily life. And I think the idea was for us to give a toolkit, a framework, a set of 8 principles actually, and then followed it up by a how-to guide with 10 tools. And the reason for that is I think a lot of these principles kind of cut across every industry, every geography, every customer segment, and effectively can help a business deal with the disruption. And not only can I actually survive this disruption, but actually thrive through it by embracing some of these changes. So let me quickly encapsulate the 8 principles. The foundational principle of all is really what we call change your mental models. I think this old school of thinking, especially if you're a successful business, why do I need to change? Why should I fix what's not broken? This construct of BCG, cash cow, if a business is really successful, we shouldn't really be cannibalizing it. I think that's kind of the Kodak, story that's well understood. And I think how do you really embrace the fact that change will happen? You have to shift your mental model, and you have to kind of find ways to remove old ways of thinking and accept reality. I think we're seeing something similar going on right now, in the recent past with the world of cryptocurrencies. And I think there's a lot of debate, but it's all about shifting the mental model. We've seen great examples in every principle in the book. We actually talked about stories of how companies have used these principles. Of course, if you look at just the mental model mindset, I mean, think about a company like Microsoft. It was all about proprietary software, all about licensed software, very hard to get around the closed ecosystem of Microsoft. And today, Microsoft not only has embraced the cloud culture, it's actually it's the owner of GitHub. It's embraced everything as a service, a massive transformation. But it started really with the big shift at the top of the house with the change in the CEO about 6 years ago. So great example of a mental model shift. Another one is Walmart. Not only did they stood up to the Amazon challenge, they've actually thrived through it, because early on they made the shift that they will have to be an omni-channel player. And not just having storefronts isn't going to be adequate. So they acquired Jet.com, that became their e-commerce front end, and they've really gone from strength to strength. They acquired Flipkart. They set up Walmart Labs in India, to actually do R&D on the digital technology side. And of course, we've now seen them entering retail financial services. So they've kind of adapted. But the biggest change really was they had to shift the mental model and say, yes, we need to accept that e-commerce and digital realities is going to be a huge industry trend in their industry. So I think that's the principle one. It's the foundational principle. That's what almost all the change has to kind of start with that foundational principle. Then we talk about the next 2 principles really talk about engaging with customers, knowing your customers better. So how can you reimagine and reinvent your approach to customers and stakeholders, and how can you speed up your digital transformation? And the journey of personalization. I think I referenced this earlier on when I said that consumer was driving a lot of the disruption. I think in this case, it's very it's very clear that these 2 principles really focus on how do you know your customer really well. Knowing your customer isn't just adequate about the regulatory framework. I need to know my client and do my risk analysis. It's actually about knowing the customer to a level that you can you can understand and identify their individual preferences. There are some really great examples of customer personalization driven companies. Think about Netflix. Netflix is probably the world's biggest personalization engine. When they started, they didn't own content. They didn't own the device that you watch Netflix on. All they really owned was the knowledge of the customer, and they were able to match the content with the consumer to a point that they then started integrating forward into creating content. And now they create content with such great accuracy because they know their customer really well. So I think the other aspect of this customer engagement and the experience side is that I think customers have also evolved and moved very rapidly away from being loyal to brands to being loyal to experiences. And what I mean by an experience is how easy is it to do business with the enterprise? How easy is it for us to deal with them? What's the customer service? I mean, this whole concept of customer obsession from Amazon is a great example of the experience that you can drive even outside of the digital, just the interface itself. So I think those are the next two principles. We talk about customer engagement, we talk about personalization and transformation, and how can companies, what kind of transformation techniques you need to be able to adapt. You have to have a very extensive investment made outside of your core systems using technology. You can use digital technology today. You can use data. Data becomes very, very core when it comes to engaging with your customer. Then, then we talk on the fourth principle is about, talent, because there is such a war for technical talent, especially, in the more advanced you get, the harder it gets to find people, especially for legacy enterprises. How do you compete with Google and Amazon and hire the same caliber of talent? So we've kind of talked about embracing what we call open innovation and open talent. That's one of the foundational principles as well. Idea is to kind of tap into the gig economy for talent and rewire your own internal HR principles. And I think the Uberization of workforce, the wisdom of crowds is a very, very powerful way to actually open up your talent and innovation ecosystem. Great example, even a company like NASA, has access to who actually hire the best and the brightest. They have 17,000 full-time employees, but they actually access another 500,000 people through their open talent programs, and they run hackathons and NASA challenges. Of course, they're able to get the entire ecosystem to rally around and solve some of those problems. They do it quite often when they're undertaking a large new initiative around design. They've solved some of the most complex spacecraft design problems through this open innovation process. I think a great way for companies to tap into a talent pool that they may not have to hire full time, they may not be able to hire, may not be able to afford, may not find, especially as you start thinking about the ability of these companies to the needs that they have right now to actually make that massive investment in technology and talent. Then principle number 5 talks a little bit about speed, adjacency, agility, and adaptability. Not only do you need to be able to protect your own core business, but you have to find adjacencies to get into, because as the pace of change has gotten really accelerated even before the crisis, and I think consumers, especially the Gen Z consumers, are looking for instant gratification. So they're always going to look for how quickly are you able to launch new products and services. I mean, you look at the example of a company like Charles Schwab. I think they've done a really good job of continuing to move into adjacencies. Of course, they're getting pushed really hard by new age competitors like Robinhood. But Schwab was one of the first ones to launch a robo-advisor in 2016, one of the first ones to launch fractional share trading, zero commission mode. And I think this dynamic of continuing to move from discount broking to wealth management to advisory, is a great example of how you can actually protect and grow your turf. Not easy to do, especially when you have such significant headwinds on the way the commissions have dropped. But I think just identifying those adjacencies, identifying the ability, the new markets that sit right next to your existing ones, and more importantly, having the adaptability to actually go into those markets is a great way to kind of think about future-proofing your business as well. The next element, actually, the next principle, number 6, talks about innovation and experimentation, because again, it ties back into future-proofing the business. I think there is given the pace of change, again, there is a constant need for opening up innovation, creating a mindset of failing fast, use adaptive experimentation. It's been used in marketing for many years. Do customer journey mapping. Unless we actually run these kind of experimental programs in any business today, we'll really struggle to kind of not just maintain and grow, but even survive our core offerings. I think we've seen that play out in almost every industry that I've talked about so far. Linked to that is the next principle, which talks a little bit about innovation across horizons. Don't just think of what's important today. Think of what may be important 2 years from now, 3 years from now, because when that change comes, you can't start at that point in time, right? So So we can't just predict the future. We can't predict the future, but we have to kind of, to remain successful, we have to prepare for it now. And I think horizons are dynamic, not static. They will continue to evolve. So, great example, I talked about cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin has been on the horizon for a while and it's suddenly exploded. If you start thinking about it today, you're too late already. But for the last 6, 7, 8 years, the whole blockchain technologies have kind of become really, robust and scalable. A great example, in the looking outward, at least in the technology side, is something like quantum computing. I think, again, a lot of investment has gone in over the last 5, 7 years. Now it's starting to kind of become a little bit more mainstream. But before we know it, it'll actually become, everyday, applications will actually run on quantum. So I think a lot of thinking across horizons has to be done across timelines, so we can actually build a portfolio of services and initiatives that actually, again, help us, future-proof the business, because we're talking about identifying new opportunities as well. M&A is a great, example, great way to do it. Moonshot Factory, the Google project is a great example of how you can run, these initiatives across horizons as well. And the next principle, final principle actually talks about how do you actually get this done? How do you think about, deploying this in your organization architecture? And how do you think of yourself, as in an ecosystem of players? Because almost the entire world is getting network orchestrated today, right? You're no longer, in your industry, you're linked to many other industries. Open banking is a great example. The payments world got disrupted very rapidly because innovation came from outside of the industry. So how do you think of yourself as, a part of a network? I think Uber has shown us the power of network orchestration. Think about, even a company like FedEx, it was in the business of moving packages from point A to point B, either overnight or over 3 days. And now suddenly it's, sees itself as a platform for logistics, right? So it's really, creating a network that logistics, users can use shippers. You can make decisions on inventory based on that network. You can get intelligence from that network and so on. So I think it's an interesting, shift away from, looking at every business as a network orchestration. So those are the 8 principles, that we've highlighted in the book. Really good, number of examples. Every principle has at least 2 or 3, and in many cases, sometimes even more stories of companies that are using those principles. And I think the idea isn't just to use these principles individually. They obviously go well together, but you don't have to kind of think about, starting with all 8. Foundational ones are really around mental models and around customer engagement. So I'll take a pause here. Happy to take a couple of questions if you have the time.
Having you. Thanks for going through the book. Parts of it were very interesting.